Hello, Tom Lavecchia here with a very special on-the-fly live edition of the Armchair NBA. And I'm going to tell you, as a podcaster, you do a lot of podcasts, you do a lot of stuff, and then you try to watch as many podcasts as you can, but you have very limited time. I'm pretty much down to 3 or 4 podcasts nowadays. Concrete, Julian Dorey's Trendifier, and just a few other ones. So Julian Dorey is an awesome guy, Jersey guy, worked, I believe, in the banking field, which we're talking about, and decided to become a podcaster. And he's doing it legitimately. He has, 500,000 subs?
No, I think I have.
No, I think you have
330 something.
330, but then you also do your audio. So probably in aggregate, you're probably in that neighborhood, I would assume.
Yeah, I actually don't know because do they show you subs on audio? I should know that, but
So now,
I don't know. It's going well though. I'm pumped.
If you go to iTunes Podcast Connect, they will give you your subscription numbers there, and I think Spotify may as well. But it's decentralized, which is weird. So you got to check them individually, Spotify or iTunes, and that's how you check. All right, so let's jump right in. So you're a successful podcaster, but you have a pretty good history. You have an interest in certain areas that I think you're a subject matter expert on, which we'll get into. But tell us about your formative years and how did you come about to being a top podcaster?
Oh man, I fell into it, and thanks for having me. By the way, excited to be here.
Pleasure.
But yeah, I mean, it wasn't really something I had ever thought about a ton. I was one of those guys who just always did what was right in front of me. You know, it was like, oh well, I'm supposed to do this, so I'll do that, and I never considered like, oh, what do I want in life? I kind of the questions you really should be asking yourself, I think, especially when you get into college and then in the years after. But I went to college and then I came out of school in basically like I had been in the business school and I was.
Where'd you graduate from?
I went to a school in the middle of nowhere in PA called Bucknell. And I came out of the business school there and I was like, well, I guess I should go to Wall Street. That's what a lot of people are doing. I looked around, I'm like, oh, okay. And I went there and I worked in the private bank at Merrill. So I worked with a really great team. I worked with a guy who had built everything himself. He had been there for 25 years or so. I had met him while I was in college and we hit it off. And to this day, very, very close relationship with him. But, you know, we worked in really high stakes stuff. We worked with that term they throw around, ultra high net worth individuals, which always felt really fucking stuffy to me. But
what's that cutoff? 10 million? 50?
That is the cutoff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's usually 10. I don't know if it's changed now, but it was 10 when we were there. So we would work with them and we worked with public companies. Sometimes it could be something really easy, like a 401k, which, you know, very little goes into that, or something a little more complex, like managing some of their cash flows or doing their 10b5-1 plans, things like that.
So you were servicing probably, I assume, family offices as well as just individuals with a fuck ton of money, pretty much.
Yes. Yeah. And we really kind of were a family office. Like we didn't work with it. There were some clients who had family offices, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them we kind of were. So I think the average net worth on the book was like, by the time I was gone, I always get the number slightly wrong, but it was in the neighborhood of like 80 million. So, you know, it was serious people and it was serious work. And I loved my team that I worked with. And that part was fun, but I didn't like the job. I mean, can you picture me in a suit?
Well, I was gonna say, usually have your hat back. You're actually pretty like usually have your hat back.
I turned it around because the angle of the camera, like I don't know, it kind of looks a little weird.
Were you like a 220 shop, or were you like did you get like how did you make your money? How did the office make your money? Because I want to get a feeling for the pay structure and how idea what kind of what you made.
Yeah, we made our money basically on annualized commissions. So assets under management, we would have a percentage of that. And I mean, I thought we had like the best deal in town. I'm not gonna lie. Like we had a really close relationship with our clients, and that part was fun. And I did like the relationship aspect. And I liked the part of my job where, I was kind of like a Swiss Army knife. I did pretty much touch everything that we did at some point or another.
Good.
But consistently throughout my years there, it was like half my job was to go out and know people. Who's talking to who, why this guy talks to that girl, why this industry matters, why that industry works with this one, why these people come into town, and I'm doing this around New York City and in the business capital of the world. And so it ended up being one of the most important things I ever did, even if I fell into it and didn't like it, because, I didn't think I understood the world coming out of college. I wasn't dumb. I'm like, well, I'm going to have to figure this out for sure.
Yeah.
But I really learned a lot. And it also made me realize the world got so big that it also like set my attitude to be that I now hold today and I want to hold for the rest of my life. Like you're constantly finding all kinds of new shit.
Correct.
Almost every second of every day. So, you never really have an understanding. That's a part of the journey of life. And that job really, it opened a lot of doors in that way. But the way it worked, it was like, in that part of Wall Street, this is, when people say Wall Street, like that's a term that after working in it, I kind of almost get like annoyed by because it doesn't even make sense. And I use it. I mean, we all use it, but it's like Wall Street can be a million different things. So in this silo of it, basically in that business, it's like you come out of college, you work like a dog for 3, 4, 5 years, you make no money. And then if you do a great job, you get the offer. Right. So I did work hard. I'd like to think I did a good job. I guess I did. I got the offer. And I realized when I got the offer from my boss, who I was very close with, I was like, holy shit, if I say yes to this, I'm just saying yes because I like him.
Yeah.
And I'm going to commit to this. And I'm going to be here. Like
relationship-centric. You weren't necessarily, the money will come, but you liked him. Okay, that makes sense.
I liked him, but I'm like, I can't say yes to this because I'm like, I'm going to be miserable. Because, could I have said yes? Made a lot of money for a year, like finally collected something for my time and bailed. Yes. But like, I'd never do that. I'd love the guy to this day. I didn't. No, that's why I'm here. I never made money. I lived paycheck to paycheck my career. And then I got to the point where I got a very nice offer. It wasn't going to be paycheck to paycheck for sure.
Yeah.
And I realized like, I'm not going to take that.
Okay. So got it. So you did your stint, right? You made a few bucks, nothing crazy, but you made a few bucks to move the needle. You could have kind of got to that next level of douchebaggery, but fuck you money. And you just said, let me become a fucking podcaster?
Yeah, well, to be clear, I never made any money.
Okay.
I mean, I'm poor. My net worth, but my parents are doing okay, but my net worth still below $10,000. So I never made any money, but I was at the point where now I was going to be making hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I had been kind of, I figured out probably a year and a half before that, subconsciously, I realized that I was interested in other things. And I was definitely, for the first time in my life, I never had been in touch with how like creative I am.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just never even like considered that. And I never thought of that like, oh, I'm kind of good at that or whatever. And I started to
have your story wrong. And I'm glad that we're talking now. Because I kind of had you as a guy that made a few bucks, got burnt out. You're ultra intelligent, which shows, and we'll get into some stuff there. And then you kind of walked away. So this is even crazier. You pretty much turned down a 7-figure deal.
It wasn't 7 figures a year, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, but it'll grow into it, meaning 5 years out, right?
5 years out, it would have been for sure.
And you'll still be young, right? But you decided to do it and then go into podcasting. But what I find interesting too, though, is not just podcasting, but that space of like concrete. I know like Danny was joking around the Julian Dorey experience, but kind of a junior Rogan. And I'm happy to say that. I know you might disagree, but a junior Rogan and all this other, kind of stuff. Like, but you don't fuck around. Like, how long has your podcast been out for?
I started building it April 2020 when the pandemic hit. And I launched it September 15th, 2020. And I have not left this studio since April 2020.
But like, it's atypical like, okay, you're an outlier. Okay, you went to a good school. You're a smart guy. You got an opportunity. Respectfully, you turned it down. But you're like a 1%er. You get what I'm saying? Like, and I want to get a feel for why. And intelligence isn't enough. Because I know a lot of smart people that aren't as successful as you. And I know, for example, maybe you might have a high net worth now, but I put a lot of money on your Trendifier podcast in 5 years. I would rather be invested in that than even have that job because you're building a brand and you own the IP, hopefully, right? So what makes you different, Julian? I kind of see it, but I can't explain it. So I'd like to be able to explain it, or at least share with the audience.
It's a great question. I don't know. I think those are the kinds of things that I feel naturally like more comfortable if they do exist for other people to answer. It's like kind of weird, like, oh, what makes me different from the rest? I don't know. I mean, when I turned down that offer, that was late summer 2019, and my boss was sad about that, of course, but he was incredibly supportive, and he's like, hey. Is the way it worked, like the company he was then going to be paying me as a part of the team, but the company like handled me before then. So he's like, all right, don't say anything to them. You do good work, stay here while you're figuring it out. So I was in the midst of shifting industries, and I actually was pretty close to finally landing something right when the pandemic hit. And on the side in January, I had some LLCs where we did like some side work on. And so my one buddy wanted me to come do media work at some event he was running in January 2020. So I said, sure. And so I went there, and minus everything that happened, after it was done, there were people coming up to me going, yo, bro, do you have a podcast? And I was like, no, I don't have a fucking podcast. Like, I had heard this before, but I'm like, who the fuck? Like, I listen to podcasts, but I'm like, we don't need another podcast out there. Like, what the fuck am I going to do with a podcast? And they just kept coming up to me. And it was a weird day. It was the day Kobe Bryant died. And I had like an hour and a half, 2-hour drive home that night. And I was at a weird crossroads in my life too. So it was just weird all the way around. And I drove home in silence. And I don't know why, but on a whim, probably compulsively, I was like, fuck it. Well, if I ever did this, I'd want to do it right with a studio. Meanwhile, I'm trying to get jobs, but I'm like, all right, on some Saturdays, I'll start looking at stuff, seeing what I would need, whatever. And it became a Saturday hobby for the next month. Wow. And so I spent time at like B&H Photo, like for hours and hours and hours, a lot of time online on Saturdays. And I ordered everything on like March 3rd, March 4th, something like that. And as you will remember, the world almost like ended, it seemed like, especially like still working on Wall Street that last week leading up to the beginning of the quarantine. It was like 5-alarm fire every day. So I forgot that I ordered it. And then the first day of quarantine, Friday the 13th of March 2020, I get a notification that says your equipment has arrived downstairs in the apartment. And I'm like, I bring it upstairs. I put it on the couch, and I like step back and I look at it, and I'm like, you have done a lot of dumb shit in your life, but this has got to be the dumbest shit you have ever done. Like, what the fuck am I going to do with all this now? Because it's like every job opportunity I had just dried up. So I don't even know where I'm going. We're stuck inside. The world's ending. And I got this I have no money, and I got this podcast equipment that I just dropped at least to me, a lot of money on, sitting on my couch. And then I just took a look at it, and I don't know. Maybe it was like stupid of me, but I was just like, well, if not now, when? And so I started building. My lease ran out, and my dad was really smart because I don't know if he's intuitive or smart, but he was like, don't re-sign that lease. This is going to go on a while, and you're just going to be stuck in a fucking apartment.
We never thought that. So I have a similar situation where we closed on our house around Valentine's Day of 20, and like serendipitously, obviously everything happened. Well, not really serendipitously, but upfront happened, and it turned out to be a really great move. Like the house appreciated 40%.
Yeah.
Like we turned out like I think that's probably my best investment. I don't push and pull if a primary home is an investment, but in terms of talk about building net worth, it was a really great move and really happy. But the world changed, and I was already, and we'll talk more about my story another time. but I already pivoted to like decentralized office. We all work from home after 17. You know, I you know this, Julian, having the ping pong table and the pool table and Wednesday night tequila nights. I don't think has much juice for guys around, you know, younger guys. And team. I just think if you give people the task, you pay them well, you give them developmental opportunities. That's gonna motivate them more. So we were kind of ahead of the curve. But I did acquire a magazine. You mentioned New Jersey City, that Digest, New Jersey. Well, now it's New Jersey Digest, but before it's called the Digest. And it was indigenous to the Gold Coast, Jersey City, Hoboken, all the way up to Weehawken. I bought it at peak, and then literally 4 months later, the revenue just dried up completely. So I had a 6-figure outlay. But we not only pivoted to digital, but we also went Jersey wide, and now it's called New Jersey Digest, and we reach 500,000 people a month.
Oh, wow!
I put out a lot of money and made an investment, but like you said, like kind of took advantage of the pandemic, if you will, because people were home and they had to read, right? So similar path in that sense. So okay, so how did you get some of your first guests, and who was your first big guest?
So, I spent those. I came back home. I had moved out when I was 18. I was never back here, and I came back home when the lease ran out, and I was like, all right, let's go for it. And I put a studio in the back room, and I spent 6 months really just like I prepared a lot. Like I made the studio look good, and my thought was, I love talking with people, so I want to get to a guest show. But I was like, I'm never going to do something that's not in person. It's just something I had, like, in order to do it my way.
That's where I want to go, too. And I give you credit to setting up the bunker, doing it. I'm a little bit of a pussy when it comes to shit like that. I'm like, should I get it? Because the economics on podcasting and sports, especially in the beginning. And I'm like, do I treat it like a business or treat it like a hobby? So anyway, hats off to actually setting up the bunker and doing it in person. So I'm really happy about that. Hey, Drita.
I think it's different too when you have to look at it as your sole source. I knew that this was going to be something that I was not going to do anything else. And I prepared, while we were forced to be totally inside, like at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was mapping out how this was going to go. And I started to realize, okay, it's going to get launched in September. I prepared myself for, listen, you've had a really good life. You worked hard, but you've had a nice life. And that life is ending right now. Like this is what it is. And so I think it's very different when, someone successful like you is doing a podcast on the side and things like that, and has a skill for being able to do it. Right. You don't have that pressure. And frankly, it's a far better way to go. So, I knew if I was going to do it, I always ask myself, why the fuck would anyone listen to a show I do? Once you ask yourself that question, you're like, why? It makes zero sense. So anything that was in my control, and there's very little that's in your control, but anything that was in my control, I'm like, I need to be the best at. So like my studio needed to look flames, and it needed to have the best equipment, the best sound, high quality.
Shirts that you wear, like the references, like it's just like you just do it correctly. We know Concrete, I believe he has a cinematography background, and it shows, but like this authenticity wins, and you got that in spades. So it's almost like my day job, I'm a digital marketer, right? And I always look for congruency, where like you're really authentic and it's a little rustic, but that's who you are, and that's the holy trinity of like it's all congruent, and that's what I think made Trendifier, in my opinion, a breakout success.
Well, that I appreciate that a ton, because one of the things I've always done in my life, people throw around the term authenticity all the time over the past 5, 6, 7 years, and it gets exhausting because, and I'm sure you hear it more than anyone in digital marketing. My God, I can't even imagine every client. Well, we want to be authentic or whatever. But for me, the word that I always thought of for everything to myself was real. I believe in things that are real. Let me expound upon that. When I was a kid, I watched the Lord of the Rings movies. They're very well done, right? Very well done. Incredible cinematography. Hats off to Peter Jackson. Everyone did a great job. Never watched them again. It's not my kind of thing, because I'm the guy that sits there and goes, "This fucking like warthogs and this shit's not real."
Correct.
You know,
Correct.
I like the raw, rigid, like this is what it is. And that's always how I've been. I've always been an out there kind of guy. Like I'd say I'm kind of weird. And like I didn't like, for example, in my career, being put in a box of like, ooh, you work on Wall Street and you wear a suit and fuck that, you know? And so I'm like, anything I do, I'm going to live and die by falling on my sword. And so whatever that is, the only thing it's going to be is that now we have headphones and a mic and a camera, but that's the only thing that changes. Everything else is going to be just like if they were recording it 24/7. Like I imagine that people are recording me 24/7 and like, what would they think of me, you know, trying to put on an act or something? And it's exhausting. And so when I was designing the show, I thought I was going to have to do like 30 to 35 solo episodes before I could get anyone to come in here. But I launched 10, right? Day one of the podcast, I put 10 podcasts out, and 2 of them were guest podcasts where I got people to come in. One of them was kind of like my cousin and I were working on our music, so I just turned on the camera, so it worked. But the other one was my friend Terrence Jones, and we had a great 2.5-hour conversation.
Sounds familiar. Who is he?
He's a lawyer now, and he was the first guest I had on long form. I had him on again for episode 62, but he's someone I grew up with who, since we were like 11, you know, he was like involved in the NAACP and everything, like a total, you know, people throw around the term activist like it's, you know, an Instagram bio. He actually like is an activist guy and really gets it. And so we had a great convo, and I was like, damn, I wonder how fast we can get to this. And right when I released this shit, I had people hit me up who I knew, who, you know, didn't live close to me, but people I knew who were doing things who no one knew or really like online may care about, but who I knew I'd have great conversations with, who were like, yo, I'd totally come on. Wow. I was like, oh. And so then
you were product centric, you know, because you could have banged out a lot of shows, mid-level guests, spend some money to distribute, get a big listenership, and then go product centric. But you were product centric from the jump.
I never had anyone in that anyone knew until episode 87. So I did a lot of early podcasts where I knew it was a little bit more on me to set the trend. It's a little different than how I have to do it now. But, you know, I just said I'm never going to miss a week, which I never have. And I'm going to create a beautiful looking product, and I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find something that I could be the best at to market this. I don't know what that is, but it's like, I say this now, but I'd be surprised if I even had the thought like that at the time. It was more like, this is survival. You know, I made a decision to go to something new, start over, move into my parents' house, which if you ever, and I have a great relationship with my parents, but if you ever told me I'd be moving back into my parents' house after leaving high school, I would have said, okay. And
well,
I'm like,
believe it or not, you're talking to the right person, because I stayed at home to 28. In the Italian and Italian American culture, as you know, probably, it's actually customary to be home later than normal. Italy, it's economic. The grandmother has a pension, so they live multi-generations. That's why they got so slammed with COVID, because they had multi-generational structure. So they ripped through houses. But also Italian Americans here in the U.S. is customary. Like if I meet somebody, they're 31 and they're Italian and they're home, I don't bat an eye. You know,
that is I never thought about that. And I'm from an Italian Irish family. We're all Italian and Irish, so I get it. I got all the Irish looking genes, but I'm like half Italian. But you know, it's still for people that may have heavy goals or things like that, and maybe aren't from like an Italian American pure household or something like that. It's still, you know, it's something you can stigmatize yourself with, and I certainly do. But you know,
that's why they created short stays.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, I say this because like I don't even know if I had the thought like I just expressed it. While I was building, it was just survival, man. It was I have to, like, I'm gonna die if this doesn't work. Correct, you know. And so I just I put out a good product, and then I started to figure out that I could make good short content, and I started to improve that. And then when I started to go massively viral with that in the second half of 2021, then I got a phone call in the first week of 2022 with an offer for the first like serious guest to come on. And that was Raj Rajaratnam, who he was the guy who effectively took the fall for the financial crisis in 2009. But he didn't.
Real quick, I went to school with, I won't say her last name, but named Renee. She went to Harvard. She went to Harvard undergrad and Harvard Law School, which I thought was interesting. Usually, you know, you do both. And she was on the crisis PR team. I want to say external for Raj, and she had the fun task of trying to mitigate, you know, the PR disaster. So
yeah, good luck with that.
Was always interesting to me.
Yeah, his I had followed his case. I had been young, and I was into that shit, and I had followed his case, and it was amazing. It was, and he's a good friend today. And that podcast was actually really hard because it was one of two podcasts I've ever prepared for before, but really the only one I've ever actually like.
I don't prepare either, and I prepare for two of them, maybe three, but I don't prepare either, and that's kind of that's why I draw into your show, because I don't have a structure, and I can tell you don't, and you're just making
there's no structure.
You know?
That one didn't have a structure either, but I needed to know everything inside and out. And I was like, I wasn't nervous to have him there. He was very comfortable. He was a great guy. I just knew that this was going to be it was a tough hill to be on, because let's call it what it is. He's a billionaire hedge fund guy. And once I reviewed the legality behind his case and had other people look into it heavily, I believe he was not guilty of what they accused him of.
Interesting.
And I do believe that strongly now. So in that podcast, like, I'm gonna like my second podcast I do with him in the future a lot more, because I was so like, he loved it, but I didn't, because I had to be so active in that podcast because I didn't want to miss a single thing. I didn't want someone to be able, I'm like, this needs to be the record, so that anyone who comes and watches it can't say, well, they didn't address this or whatever. So it was a weird podcast, but it worked out great. Most people did like it. Some people wish he talked a lot more, and I agree with them. So they'll get what they want in the second one. But once I did that, then a few different things happened. I met Danny from Concrete. Yeah. So that was, and he's like one of my best friends now.
How'd you meet him though? So we got Raj. He wanted Raj, or what happened?
No. Actually, someone else had called me up and asked for my opinion on this other podcast. I said, okay, what's the name of the podcast? And I pride myself on trying to know all the big podcasts. Like, I listen to a lot of shit, man. And so they said the name of the podcast is Concrete with a K. And I said, oh, I haven't heard of that. So I look at it on YouTube. I pull it up. He's got like a good subscriber base, and I click. I'm like, how the fuck have I never heard of this? And I started watching. I watched probably
like when you're that lane of
exactly
the criminals, and you know.
But I had always done. Here's the thing. I had always done my podcasts on Spotify and Apple. I never did my podcast on YouTube. And Danny was a very YouTube centric, and he's doing well on everything now. But that's where he built. And so I wasn't like, now I'm a YouTube head. I never like, I use YouTube a ton, but like, I wasn't the guy who was a part of the YouTube community. I went onto YouTube to watch what I wanted and like, didn't, whatever. So now I do that. I'm like, wow, I hadn't heard of him. And when I was working, I would just have like his podcast playing in the background. I'm like, this shit's fire. And his cinematography was excellent. I'm like, damn, I wonder who this dude is. And so I went back to the friend. I said, hey, that's a great podcast. I love it. And so about 3 weeks later, I get a DM from Danny.
Oh, shit.
I'm like, what the fuck? And so I hit the DM, and he goes, yo, bro, some of my fans are fans of your show, and they pointed out to me and said I should get in touch with you. And I checked out the podcast. I love it. Like,
oh, wow.
But can we talk? I said, fuck yeah. So then we got on the phone, and we invited each other on each other's podcasts. Nice. I sent him a guest. He sent me a guest right away. I mean, it was like, and he's been one of my biggest cheerleaders, period. Like that guy will help me with absolutely anything. He got me Andy Bustamante, who he found, and he really blew up. And now look what's happened because of what he did. He got me Matt Cox, who's another guy that he really blew up. There were two guys he didn't get me, but who were on his show that have great episodes with him, John Boziak and Tim McBride. Yeah. And then he also, there was one or two others he got me. We both had Ryan Tate because we were both talking about that at the same time. And then I sent him David Satter. I sent him Big Dan.
Nice.
Who else was the? He just sent me Jim. He sent me he sent me the other Jim.
Oh, nice.
He sent me I sent him Jim DiOrio, but he sent me Mad Dog Jim Lawler, the CIA guy. He had a great podcast with him. He called me up. He's like, "Yo, you gotta talk to this dude." I was like, "Say less, kid." Well, but so that's how I met him.
I have to admit, I gotta send him something. So I'll send give me a PO box. I gotta send him whatever his poison is. I probably got a lot of my mob guests from him. Not that I didn't know who they were, but
from Danny.
He made them relevant again. Obviously, Johnny Elliott I knew already, but Larry Mazza he had on, which was good. And then non-mob, I had Tim McBride. Jim DiOrio, I probably jointly saw him on yours and his. So I use Concrete as kind of a good referral source in terms of getting some good guests. And and you guys are similar, but you're different. So like I can watch Jim DiOrio on Concrete and then watch it on Trendifier. Like you guys are definitely not an echo chamber.
I should have said this too. I should have said this earlier, by the way. Yeah. Jim DiOrio was one guy who just the public didn't know, but obviously his resume for people listening right now who don't know who he is, the guy was West Point.
I had him on my show based off of Trendifier.
Oh, he just came on?
Yeah, just a few weeks
ago. Awesome. I got to see it. Send me that when it's done. But like, yeah, so he was a guy, I knew him. So before episode 87, he was by far my most popular guest, and people were like blown away I could get him, and he was a big guest and continues to be. I should have said that. But yeah, I mean that's great to hear, because I think I jokingly describe it with people. I'm like, Danny's weed and I'm cocaine when it comes to like style. Like Danny will let people talk themselves into a hole for 25 minutes and then just calmly hit them with something where they're like, fuck. Yeah. And I'm kind of the more like active, and I'll do that too, but he's very, very laid back. I can come out of it a little bit.
I like that. And all right, so let's have some fun. Okay. So I didn't know until we just talked earlier that you have a little bit of a mob history background. You're strong with a lot of the CIA, a lot of conspiracies. So let's kind of start with my wheelhouse, and we'll go from there, or our wheelhouse, if you will, with the mob stuff. What's kind of like your bailiwick in terms of era for the mob? What you know a little bit more about,
Yeah, everything, man. So we had to do research papers in high school. So I think it was my junior year. I was assigned the Sicilian Mafia, as it was for European history. So I started researching that, and I'm like, this shit's wild. And The Godfather, I've probably seen 7,000 times. I know it by heart. My favorite movie of all time. I love every mob movie ever. Love it. And so I was like, this shit's awesome. And this was not like the earliest days of YouTube, but it was earlier days of YouTube. And so my senior, like I got really into it, and I would watch stuff. And then in the year after that, like my senior year of high school, I had set it up, taking all like the hard classes sophomore and junior year. So I had a little more time senior year, and I got like 2 free periods a day, which was fucking great. And I would sit in the computer lab and watch mob documentaries and read mob books. And the whole history was absurd to me. And so I would try to talk with people about it for years. Yeah. And they're like, well, I watch The Sopranos or whatever. And now it's like a big thing on YouTube. And I'm like, where the fuck have you people been?
Yep, got huge. I actually interviewed Totorina's son.
Really?
Yeah.
When was that?
A few months ago. First ever U.S. interview. Really only second interview ever.
What did he have to say?
So he wrote a book in Italy called Rena Family Life. and it just focuses on his story with his father and his family. That's it. So I didn't get to ask the questions I would have liked, to be honest. But also in Italy, mafia association, you probably know this. Mafia association is, you could be in a mafia here and it's legal. You just can't act on it, right? Kind of like don't ask, don't tell, right? But in Italy, a mafia association is illegal. So he got arrested for that. I don't want to talk about it much. I believe he was inducted. And they do that in Italy a lot. Like if you're a big wise guy, they'll induct their sons, whether they're capable or not, to make sure they don't get shaken down, they get protected. And you probably know some about that in your research. So I interviewed him, and the focus was on his father, obviously, in growing up. It was a little minimal in terms of what I wanted to ask. It was narrow, but you as a smart guy, and I'll send you, I did it in Italian actually and English, and I'll send you the versions. But near the end, you'll be able to kind of read between, the Sicilian mafia is not what it appears by design. And that's how the Sicilian culture is as well. I'm not Sicilian, but that's how the Sicilian culture is. And I mean, answered some questions without answering them. And I loved that interview. Some people loved it. Some people thought it was boring, but I'm like, I couldn't ask about his time doing in prison. They confiscated $125 million of his father's money. And we all know that was probably only 1/3. There's so much I want more, but he's going to come back, and it was his first ever interview. So that was pretty dope. I also interviewed Pablo Escobar's wife, which I thought was cool.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah. It was good. I asked her, I kind of feel a little bit, definitely PTSD, like major PTSD, as you can imagine. And I don't know, and I'm being respectful because I'm not the guy who has a guest on and then like dogs him. I don't know if she was hedging in terms of, she claimed to be, my wife's from Ecuador, and my wife's all in my business. And so to me, the representation of Latin culture is where the wife's maybe more involved than you think. Where the Italian culture, it's not, right? And she was like, I wasn't involved in the decisions. I didn't give my opinion. I didn't really instruct him as much. I didn't consult him as much. Didn't matter who I liked and did it. And I don't know if that was part of maybe truth, or maybe like it's a real threat if she did. And she had to negotiate for her life for a year and her family. And she had to sign off assets, and she had to give stuff to the government and give stuff to the other cartels. Fucking insane. You know what I mean? Like insane. And I thought of you. I did it in English. My wife translated it in Spanish. So I could have maybe did it in Spanish, but I don't want to.
Oh, it was a translation episode.
Yeah, she doesn't speak English. Total Doreen doesn't speak English, and she doesn't speak English either. She speaks Spanish.
Wow.
No, not a lick of English. So I asked.
Do you speak Italian?
I do.
Okay, so wait, but I was gonna say Toto speaks Sicilian. That's barely Italian.
I grew up around Sicilians, and I've been to Sicily 3 times. So believe it or not, I get a little shit for my Italian on an interview. And the reason why it's hard, Julian, and I know you appreciate this, I had to do it in proper Italian, and that was harder for me. Like if I did it in dialect, I don't need anything, and I could have did it. I had a translator in the background hang out, but like I could have did it. But he might not understand me, or I might not understand him if he spoke his dialect.
Yeah.
But I did Sicily 3 times, so I know Sicilian dialect pretty well too. Like I'm a weird dude. Like I'm like, it's like
Sicilian is way different. Well, I lived in Italy. I lived in Italy for half a year, and it was, I got good at it. I can't speak it anymore. I can kind of pick up on what people are saying just because I haven't spoken in years. But when you go to Sicily.
Yeah.
It's a different language. I mean, it's hard for me to describe like on the spot with some of like the endings and things they'll do, but the way that they pronounce a word will completely change what you think the word is.
Well, so to work, right? So to work in Italy is lavoro, right? And in my dialect near Napoli, it'll be fadia or fadica. And in Sicilian, it's travacchia. Nowhere near either. Like for example, if I were to answer the door and say, "Who is this?" in Italian, you'd say "Chi è?" In Sicilian, it's "Gue." It's a very rough. Like Italy's Italian's a beautiful.
Very
language.
Rough.
And very rough language. Like I said, go back to the Tortorino interview. The fact that I was even talking to his son, he wasn't a pentito, he didn't rat, so that was another thing. So it's kind of like. You have a guy who informed on, right? And you'll unpack the shit out of that. But then you're like a little challenge where like, wow, this guy rolled and like on his kind of Confederates. Not that like I don't judge. Like, I had a ton of guys that were informants. But when you have a guy that's real on, like Pablo Escobar's wife, who was real, and Totorina, it makes for a little less dramatic show. But their realness and authenticity is what matters. So kind of going back to that a little bit.
It's a strange thing when you think about it, because it's like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, he didn't rat. You love that. But then you're like, but what did he rat on? You know, and it's like, oh, do you love that? It's a very, I don't know. The world's a complicated place.
So, okay. So I'm going to hit you with your first CIA question related to the Italian mafia. Okay. So Vito, Gaetano Badalamenti was basically chased out by Totorino and those guys, right? He set up shop in Brazil. He hooked up with the Bananos and Gambinos here, the Pizza Connection.
Yep.
Now, he did not get his drugs from Sicily or from France. He got them directly from the Mujahideen. Okay. Now, here's my opinion, just sole opinion, and don't, I don't want this to get turned off and, Andy's Confederates come in and take me away. But I think the CIA brokered that, and I'll tell you why. Number one, the Mujahideen needed money, right? And number two, the government couldn't buy heroin from them. They give them arms, give them training, and let's chase out the Russians, right? But they couldn't. I don't know. Maybe Andy knows better, but I don't just see them cutting checks. I just don't. So I think they said, "Great, you guys have Poppy. We're gonna hook you up with these guineas over in Sao Paulo and the U.S." And they brokered that deal, and they were making a ton of money. Now, fast forward 10 years later, at $1.6 billion, they now get rid of the Russians and take the weapons that we gave them and then turn them on us. So the Mujahideen was no longer useful to the CIA, which are now the Taliban, whatever, graduated to. So I think they said, fuck you, we're going to turn off your supply. Hey, Giuliani, do me a favor. Arrest these 22 guineas, send out this pipeline, shutting down Badalamenti, and shutting down the lifeblood, the Mujahideen. Where do you land on that, Julian?
So, as a disclaimer, I get yelled at a lot by people because I'm, like I'll play along with some things, like, conspiracies do exist. And there's some I certainly believe in and I'll joke about and laugh about. But then there's a lot where I'm the guy pulling people back and saying, hey, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm saying how realistic is that? And one of the main things when it comes to the CIA is, and I do it too, we throw around the term the CIA. I was just thinking about this yesterday because it's what always comes out of my mouth. And that can bring guilt to an entire organization that does do a lot of important work. And that seems to be a not popular thing to say these days, but I'm glad we have one. I'll put it that way. But when I was listening to that story right there, first of all, I know one of the guys who was on that case doing it, and Jim knows a lot of people who were on that case. And there was a lot of brilliant casework. Does that mean we see every single way they did something? No.
And the FBI guys that way on the Philly part of it who lived where you are by there, the Cherry Hill Gambinos. And were not indicted, or some that were indicted.
Right. So, I mean, it could. I think the most likely thing, having talked to some people in the CIA now on the record and off the record, just by judging the different types of characters I've met and how these people carry themselves. And, look, there's two that people have seen me talk with in here. Yeah. And there's, I have 7 hours of content with Andy. I have another 3 with Mad Dog Jim Lawler now. And then Andy and Danny and I did a fun fuck around podcast on Concrete with him and Jim. And I would imagine people get a pretty good feel at home because it's on camera and it's long form and you get to watch every single thing they do. But when you are in here with someone locked in with your headphones on and the world off for 3 hours and you're sitting right across from them in a way that we can't do right now, doing it like this, just frankly, you come to understand some things about people. It doesn't mean you're right about everything. There's a lot that you should be very unsure about. But then when you combine that with the fact that I do all my edits and I get to see every single thing back. And then when I go to edit clips, I will see a person in blown up form say something thousands of times. And you will pick up on little things on that 1001 time that you never picked on when you heard it or when you were editing it this whole time. And then you start to tie things together. And so I say all that because I get a feel for the fact that I can't know everyone inside and out because I'm not in their heads clearly, but you can get a feel for what types of actions they might be capable of voluntarily.
Got it.
And I come away convinced that, like every organization, the CIA has some people in it who are bad. No. And then they have a lot of people who are good. And including some of the good people, you can make decisions sometimes because think about all the information they know that we don't, right? Just like one person working on one country somewhere. And they know everything. No one gives a fuck about whatever this country is at home. It's never on the news. No one even knows what it's called in America. But they know, oh my God, if people only knew how close we were coming to X, Y, or Z, they could talk themselves into letting certain things happen that if you just looked at it on paper would be like, that's horrible.
Correct.
But
on the macro,
rectifying that with other things. So could I see something like that happening? Yes. Because of that, and because another thing that I'm picking up on, and I could be wrong, but it's my interpretation talking to a lot of these guys, is that the CIA has a tremendous. They find the best people and they train their people so instinctively to operate on their own that these individual agents make a lot of decisions on their own. And so I started this long tangent with saying we throw around the term the CIA when we say things like this. What I could see in that scenario is not the CIA at home necessarily signing off on doing a giant, I'm sorry, after JFK, I don't think these guys would have liked the idea of working with some morons in the mafia because
we're going to talk about that because I kind of feel like as the mafia became irrelevant, especially the American mafia.
But in the 80s, they were relevant, but still they were stupid.
Correct.
The CIA doesn't want to deal with because the CIA is also not supposed to be conducting business on home territory.
Correct.
So this is a lose-lose for them. Could I see, though, there being an asset, a spy over in the Middle East who has friends that he has made working on behalf of the government with some of these places and with some of these people in these places? And could I see him being the one like, oh, you should talk to so-and-so there? Like even just saying he doesn't know him. You should talk to Gaetano there. Could I see him being the one who said that and said, well, this is how you could go about initiating it if you didn't already know that? Yes. Does that mean the CIA did it? No, it means one agent made a call and something happened and then something very bad happened. But we live in this world where that butterfly effect is massive on every grain of sand, And so now think about it in terms of high level, high money, illegal, dangerous things around the world. A butterfly flap can change it can change everything.
Yep. So no, Drito, we'll maybe get to a little later. He's like,
and I didn't miss the Iran-Contra affair. By the way, we can talk about that.
Drito, you got to maybe research this guy a little bit, if anything. Probably a subject matter expert. Okay, so this is a little slight shift. So the mob in the 80s was a powerhouse. Then, I think I always say this, probably mattered to the mid 90s locally. And then obviously, now it is what it is. I almost bring this up every episode almost painstakingly, but I would love you to weigh in. The Coke boom. And I know it's a podcast, I'm speaking to the lion. You and I are able to extract the morality out of this. So we're not talking about the morality of it. But the mob was not a big player in the 80s with Coke. For whatever reason, they had the heroin pipelines. They kind of wind that down. And I felt like they missed a big opportunity not jumping in with the Colombians and the Mexicans and saying, guys, you know what? Just bring it to Chicago. We got 26 cities. We'll install it. Bring some more maybe guineas over from Sicily. Did the mob make a mistake by not getting into the Coke game? And if so, can you elaborate?
I don't know if I'm the guy to say whether it was a mistake or like a mistake. It's like, yeah, it was a mistake not to get into a highly illegal industry. I I mean, I would say probably yes. I did have Luis on here, who was an original cocaine cowboy, and his father was a made guy, and so he was the guy who hooked
Oh,
up the
really?
Cubans. Yeah, he hooked up the Cubans with uh, with the mafia in New York,
Well, no,
and
I'm not
so
saying they weren't involved, but they were, like you said, they
it
were
wasn't
made
as heavy.
guys.
You're right.
They were
Yeah.
made guys that
Yep.
dealt in coke, but as guys, not as a mafia, similar to the CIA example. Sorry, keep going. Sorry.
Right. So, I mean, I would say if we're talking dollars and cents, of course it was a mistake not to get into it.
Correct.
That shit, I'll tell you, I wasn't shocked by anything at college except for one thing. I could not believe how many people did coke.
No?
First of all, like, I don't know how you afford the shit when you're in college. That was insane to me. And I never fucked with it because I was like,
No.
I'm lucky I don't have an addictive personality, but I don't think I'm infallible. And I imagine you've been around people on coke a lot in your life. I certainly have. Still am around people when they're having a good time on a Saturday night. And I always look at it and I go, that looks fucking awesome. Like, that looks great. Like, I think I'd like that a lot. So, I never did, but it was fucking everywhere. I can count on my one hand the number of people who I know who I could vouch for who never did it in high school or in college. Like, that's how prevalent it was. So of course, like, yeah, I think the mob not getting heavy into that was certainly a mistake. And that's why, like you said, you saw the Colombians and Mexicans and Cubans come in and eat their lunch in that respect. But, I think there certainly have been, you started with the Pizza Connection example, and I think there's reasons to say that one couldn't have gone that way. But there certainly have been examples for sure, even if I can't say like which ones are sure. We know there's been examples where drug syndicates have been used as a means for intelligence operations. Absolutely. No question about it.
Oh man, I got a referral for an author who was former CIA. No, he was DEA, and he's the one who uncovered the Rick Ross case. And that wasn't mafia. That was obviously I think black drug dealers with the CIA. But yeah, they definitely facilitated that.
Oh yeah.
Surprise. But that's why. Okay, so which brings me. I want to stick on the mafia thread keep on that for a second. So because I think in the 60s, 70s, or even not 80s, but maybe 60s and 70s, I think, like you said, the CIA or the DEA or the bigger organizations, if they needed a mob, which I don't think they would, but let's say they did, you can go to them as an organization, right? And if you get shit done, like especially Kennedy era, etc. But then they lost their power systemically, right? So I know it's a loaded question, but why do you think, or what was the initiation or the flashpoint for the deterioration of the mob in the U.S.? Like,
Rico. Yeah. I think that's everything right there, and we're gonna talk about that because I'm having Joe Bonanno's grandson on Saturday, and I know one guy who does not do podcasts, like does not do them. This guy Jules Bonavolanta, he was the guy who came up with the idea for Donnie Brasco. Joe Pistone was his fellow agent and a great friend of his. He came up with that. He was his handler, and he was one of the key guys with Jim Kallstrom and a few other dudes from the mid 70s through Gotti, who took down the mafia. And they were all.
I was with, sorry to cut you off, Julian. I was with Ramona Rizzo, who's Lefty's granddaughter, last night. It's a friend of mine.
Oh, Lefty Ruggiero?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, I'm gonna get somebody unless you're gonna shit. You're gonna be like, oh, what?
You've already, like, before we were on here, you were telling me, so I was like, damn. But yeah, so I had the chance to know him when I met him when I was a teenager, and he was like, he would tell me about all these cases and shit they did and whatever. And, they oversaw the knee cutting or the kneecapping of the mafia, because really, like, John Gotti was the last, breath of like, these guys can do whatever the fuck they want.
Correct.
However, I'll say this. without going into some details for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
When I moved up to North Jersey,
Yeah.
and spent a lot of time in New York and North Jersey,
Yeah.
I was shocked at how much power they still do have.
Oh no, 100%. 100%.
That was eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
And I heard, I have a lot of friends whose last names end in a vowel and who have nothing to do with it, by the way.
Yeah.
And some of the shit that I would hear about happening was like, what? That's happening in 2019, 2020. Like, what?
Yep.
It is, and it's the scummiest part of it is that, and the part I've never understood as time has gone on in America and they've existed is how they will just come into a business where the person who owns the business has a name that ends in a vowel, and they'll say, "Oh, you owe us 20% now."
Yeah.
Like that shit. Fuck you.
Own people too.
Fuck you. Like it's just, and it happens all the time. Like they are not, look, they don't give the way Jules explained it to me years ago, and I think continues to say it, is they don't necessarily give them the same problems that say the Russian mob does, because the Russian mob, chops up bodies into a million pieces. Like they're pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But from a business operation standpoint, like they're solid. The Italians are real solid, and they'll, they do cause problems. So it's not, that is definitely a myth that it's not still very prevalent. It is. It's just, let's be fair here. Rico took away these guys' ability to be brazen about almost anything.
Correct.
They can. I mean, when you look at that commission trial in 85, it's like that changed everything.
Yeah.
They found people guilty for things in places that they never were or never heard about. But they raised their eyes to another guy who raised his eyes to another guy, who raised his eyes to another guy, who raised his eyes to another guy. And that was enough to be able to say guilty because you run this whole organization.
Well, I had Larry Mazza on, and he gave probably the best answer I've gotten. So, this leadership is everything. So when they took 5 old school strong leaders, the guys that replaced them, like Gotti, like, I know it sounds corny, but like there's guys they groomed for positions, right? Like Neil Delacroce will say, "Oh, I like Patsy Conte," or "I like this guy or that guy." They groomed them for these positions, right? And Carlo Gambino did not have John Gotti on the radar screen in their mafia management, program.
I wonder why.
Neither did Castellano. So it's almost like, at least for the Gambinos, it got ripped away, and you put in a guy that, like, it sounds bad, but was it meant for management, right? You had the Lucchese's, you had Musso, Musso Casso, who were crazy, and you'll appreciate this. This is my old show, the NBA Bunt Man. I had a guy who's a made guy, John Panisi. We had a show together. We did about 100 shows together, and he was a Lucchese member, and he flipped in 18. But we cover this exhaustingly. And Vic Amuso and Anthony Casso, they were beefing with the Jersey faction of Lucchese. It's pretty formidable, like 25 guys, and all pretty powerful, which you probably know some of the names. And they were gonna have a Christmas party for them, and they were going to kill them all at one time. And the only reason why they didn't was because they didn't know where to put the bodies. Like that Castle would have.
That sounds like a gas pipe. Yeah.
So and this is not that long ago, So the guys they put in for the power vacuum for each of them, except for Fat Tony, he was a front boss, so Chin remained. But other than the West Side Genovese, the other 4 families, the people that they substituted him with, hurt them. So I think that was a good inflection point. But you and I are kind of smart guys, right? We're not mobsters, but we're smart guys. Why didn't they go? Maybe they might have now, but because if Rico is a centralized structure, why didn't they organize into a decentralized structure like terrorist cells? So it was like, great, I'm still a mobster. I still have my weight. I'm still who I am, a made guy. But you know what? I'm going to operate autonomously from these other crews so they can't get us on a RICO. Why do you think that's? They're not smart enough? Because RICO says, "Hey, centralization is bad," right?
I don't think that exists. Yeah. When you had terror cells operating in the United States prior to 9/11, and then they went and did what they did, do people go, "Oh, well, that's decelled from Osama bin Laden"? No, they went right. Like, I don't think that exists. The answer is I don't think that exists. And I think what you're talking about, though, is probably what in their minds they've tried to. I mean, I don't know, but if I were guessing, what they've tried to do, you know, like try to say as little as possible, and just there's an expectation that a certain amount is going to be made, and you pay a certain tax on that amount, and let's hope for the best. Like, I would imagine they try to think like that. But listen, these are not these guys aren't winning the gene pool lottery of brain cells.
Members.
No, it's not. You're not dealing. Now, look, have there been some who are really smart over time? Yes. Yeah. And Joe Bonanno was certainly one of them. And there's certainly exceptions, but you know, you have to look at the whole organization. And Vinny with the bat down there isn't holding the bat because he was getting a fucking A in calculus. That's just not how this goes.
Agreed. Well, which segues me to the other question I always ask. I get so much shit for this because you have, like, I call mobologists, guys like us that just are fascinated with it. We know a lot about it to be dangerous, and we look at it almost academically. But then you got like a lot of street guys that that are out of the life, you know, but like still think they're in the street, right? So I get a lot of shit for this, but so why didn't the mob? So me, for example, I'm a Italian American guy. I have my MBA. I do pretty well for myself. I'm legitimate as the day's long. My niece, she's a doctor. My other niece, she's a lawyer. Why didn't they become more of a white-collar Freemasonry type organization as Italian assimilated and become part of the political ruling class as opposed to Vinny with the bat, right? Why didn't the mafia progress into a Freemasonry white-collar organization, in your opinion?
That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. You know, and I'm just shooting the shit and guessing here, I guess. But it's funny because one of the things Sal was talking, or he goes by Torrey, Salvatore Bonanno. He was talking to me about is because his dad obviously was an educated guy who then went into the life. And that is not what Joe had wanted. Correct. But I can't remember what he said now with this, but I do know I asked him, like, what did your grandpa think of that? Like, when he did, like, was he like upset? Because again, his grandpa happened to be a very educated guy. He had wanted the next generation to be doctors, lawyers, whatever. It took them one more generation to be that. Like Sal's generation, pediatrician.
His mother's a doctor.
His mother, no. His mother is
his brother. Tori's brother.
His brother. Yes, his brother's a pediatrician. His other brother's in trucking. Sal's in cell phone towers, like, and they don't know, like, they speak of this from the outside because the family agreed to be excommunicated from it. Like, they were kids when it happened, and then they moved out to Arizona, and it was just like, oh, it's the family history. So they're as fascinated about it as a fan as we are. It's just cool because he lived with them. You know, there's a lot of insights there, and you know, they're part of history in that way. But you know, I do think some of it has to do with the fact that a lot of these guys weren't when you're a total street guy and you're a wise guy and you carry that's the environment you create for your kids. So what do your kids know? That's what they know. Yeah. And then if you're also living in a densely populated urban environment like a Queens, like a Long Island, even, you know, technically suburbia, but with a lot of other of your type and things like that. Well, that's their friends they're going to hang out with. And what are the friends going to do? They're going to go do this, right? And enough of them continue to do that it stays on. Now, have we seen plenty of mobsters where, like, their next generation isn't involved in it and they become a doctor and stuff? Yeah, We actually see it all the time.
Yep.
I just think that there's a place where other ethnicities, two I'm thinking of are Greeks and Jewish people, have an advantage over everyone else is they do a great job of sticking together in educating their youth. Like they get
culture,
right.
so
it's an amazing, like I tried to really pick up on it too. I used to caddy at an all Jewish golf course, and I would talk to the guys about it. Like, which
one was it?
It was Mountain Ridge up there in North Jersey. And like these guys were all successful as hell, and like their kids were driven. And I'd be like, damn, like, they're all going to good schools. They went to pretty good schools too. Yeah. Like it's been a generational thing. And I kind of, I wanted to pick up on that. And my best friend growing up was Greek, and it was the same thing. Like I wanted to pick up on what that was. And I just think for whatever reason, there's even like close knit ethnicities like Italians, we don't do as good a job as those two do. So that's probably part of it, like a lack of communication per se and environment. And again, I think the environment breeds a lack of that education too. Like I think there's just it's fun. Like that's part of the answer. It shouldn't be fun to kill people and shit. That's when you become a psycho. But like, what do people love? They love mob movies. Yeah. I love them. Right. Yeah. And so you could convince yourself like, oh, we're the good guys.
Yeah.
And I think people do that. And then maybe when they get into it and they realize they're not, they learn to just pretend that they are.
Where do you land on? I interviewed Sammy the Bull, and also Judge Gleason as well. And I'm so conflicted because as a kid, and my first cousin married Sammy the Bull's niece, his sister's daughter. So I knew Sammy growing up. I didn't know him well, but I knew of him obviously through my family, and interviewed him. And I'm conflicted because at one end, it's like you ratted out like 35 guys or whatever, and they went to jail. But then on the other end, I'm like, these guys are bad guys. They should go away. And then I'm like to Judge Gleason, who was a prosecutor at the time, I said, like, you put a guy away for 5 years who killed 19 people, but then they sat down academically and were like, well, putting these 35 guys away, we saved maybe 50 lives, right? So you're not that you're a street guy, but you're an intelligent guy who knows a lot. Where do you kind of land on the whole Sammy the Bull deal with the government and that whole situation?
So I think a big difference. I'm always careful how I say this because I do not want to be misheard. I want to be clear. Like
we do shorts, so be careful.
when somebody like kills somebody, no matter how you crack it, unless it's in self-defense or something like that, or like someone rapes somebody and they're getting away with it and you're chasing after them, like unless it's something like that, it's bad. Like it's like the worst thing you can do.
Correct.
But I do say to people, there's a huge difference to me sitting down with someone who was a mobster, who killed people in that life, who maybe it obviously isn't now.
Yeah.
And sitting across, not that I have, but sitting across from some dude who killed his wife. Those two things are not the same.
Correct.
And I don't want to whitewash killing somebody at all. But what I say is that those guys know what they signed up for. They signed up for a life that ends in the can or in a body bag. And they know what they signed up for. They know what this is. They're in that world. If I see like a mobster, and I haven't heard one recently, maybe you can enlighten me. If I see like a mobster kill like some civilian or something, fuck that, send him away. That's different. But when you're dealing with people who have decided to put their financial interests within that world, and they know what it is.
Correct.
Look, if they get caught, they have to go to prison, and the government has to take that seriously. I don't think it's quite the same. And I think that's part of why the fact that it's like a game, as fucked up as that is what it is. Yeah. I think that's part of why the government, I'm sure there's some where they feel like they really got to swallow a tough pill, like, cause they're like, I can't believe we're going to let this guy walk or whatever, or get a lighter sentence. But that's why in a lot of them, they'll do it because they recognize like, all right, this person's always been a bad person or whatever, but like, they don't want to be. And now they've turned their back on this because they can't go back.
Yeah.
And so good luck. Like, go piss off the person in the town we're going to send you to and kill him and watch what happens. You know what I mean? Like, that's not, it's not going to happen. And I don't believe, at least that we've ever found out about, that's ever happened, where like someone became a government witness and then was found guilty of murdering someone in their new town. There's got to be someone out there.
Yeah. Well, there's the people that were Cinnamate or they were in the program. I had a friend of mine became a friend. He was in the program and he kind of got caught and jammed up, and I think he might have signed out or got kicked out. But that's actually fairly common, not for murders, but to go into the program and then being either writing yourself out or getting kicked out.
Yes, Sammy's. By the way, though, Sammy's like so, and I don't follow him nearly as closely as you would think. Yeah. Like, it's just because he kind of like reeked to me. Like, he's almost like a caricature.
Yeah,
like it's very hard for me to take him seriously. I'm seeing down here did some about him killing his wife's brother. That's rather telling, but I don't even know anything about that. But it's like, yeah, I'm sure Sammy the Bull was a really hard pill for those feds to swallow because they looked at it and they're like, well, we're gonna get John.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll do it, But I'm sure they were like, come on, like we can't make a deal with this guy. But they did.
Now. So we know about the decline of the mob in the U.S. I talked to Jim, and this was on the podcast, a little offline, but on the podcast. In the 80s, if you were in the FBI, oh my God, if you were on the Gambino squad or you were in New York covering the Five Families, you're looking Senator Corleone, President, you're going somewhere, right? AG, whatever, right? Look what happened with Free. Look what happened with Comey. Look what happened with Mueller, right? We have a lot of use cases there, right? But now, and Jim, Jim is irreverent and savage, as I think you guys called him, which is true. He says the Island of Misfit Toys in the FBI are the OC guys now. It's like,
that doesn't surprise me.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So like, if you and I were on the other side of the law, aside from putting resources into terrorism, is this a time for them to regroup? You know what I mean? Like, give me kind of your thought, because your particular interest, obviously, have on, because like the mob stuff, but the other stuff. Like the fact that you had Andy Bustamante and Jim on, along with Trendifier and Concrete, that's like some serious, mind-blowing shit. Like,
I'll do a better job next time with that podcast too. That was not my best day. I knew it when I did it, but it was fun and it was a lot of fun. The next one will be really, really good. But yeah, I mean, that was like, we didn't really think anything of it until after we did it. We were like, wow, that's kind of wild. Like FBI, serious FBI, like Jim was serious FBI. Andy was, I'm not allowed to say where Andy was undercover, but you can listen to how he describes it on podcasts. That was a serious undercover dude, who's probably still in the CIA, but it's like, that was pretty historical, like personally for me sitting there, just like, wow, this is cool. And I think Danny thought the same thing, but like, what was the first part of that question again?
Well, no, because I was like, kind of like, now that the better agents are on terrorism, white collar, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Now the Island of Misfit Toys, or the 130 calls it, are kind of covering the wise guys. Do you think there's a chance that maybe the wise guys can regroup a little bit because of the lack of not only resources, but the lack of talent that's chasing these guys too?
I mean, to me, 1 + 1 would kind of equal 2. I do think there's an advantage with technology now.
Yeah,
that is like, and again, if you're an international terror organization or something, you have some brains and resources behind that, depending on who you are.
Good point.
That the mafia doesn't have. So, I think that gives him an advantage. It doesn't surprise me to hear that. And I love when Jim like characterizes the Misfit Toys group of the FBI across different eras. It's great. But I don't, I'll go back to what I said a little bit ago, and I will reiterate that I was surprised at the very open and brazen level of power that I personally saw them still exerting.
Oh, they're still bopping around. Now, a little bit of and I know you know your mob stuff, but just in case if you're not as versed in it, and we're gonna have Julian back on because we still have a lot to cover. We're wrapping this part up soon, but Canadian organized crime, Canadian Italian organized crime has thrived. They kill people left and right. The Ndrangheta, which is the Calabrian mob, is big over there now. The Ndrangheta, I think, is even wealthier than the cartels. They have a turnover about $50 billion a year. Some say 80 billion. They actually buy.
Some say they have the biggest heroin, like the biggest heroin importation in the world, right?
Yeah. So not that the cartels are not the most important and serious, but like I always say, like economically, they're the customers of the cartels. So if they're not buying from the cartels own the money. Plus, they have institutional presence. They also strong in Australia as well. They have Ndrangheta cells there. So my question to you, though, is to me, like, for example, Italian American, there are certain Italian absolutes. Dinner on Sunday, family values, I don't know, work, family, and religion are your pillars, right? So whether I'm Italian American here or Italian Australia, we're going to probably get along because we have similar cultural and family values, right? However, from the mafia standpoint, all the mafias have thrived somewhat with the exception of American Cosa Nostra, which you would think the biggest opportunity is here. The most money is here. The best innovators are here. You know what I mean? Like, so why did the mob in the U.S. outside of Rico not flourish, but Cosa Nostra flourish in like 6 other countries? Where would you land on that? You know? In your opinion,
maybe it has something to do with the fact, because I know, like, obviously, trying to think of all the different places you said in there, but in Italy they try to crack down, but they're so ingrained into owning pieces of the government that they're still able to, I mean, like they run all the olive oil in that country, for example. Like, they have everything, right? So it's different than here where they immigrated and they're one group out of many, right? And it's a big country. It's the most powerful GDP in the world. Did they have a lot of power within governments? Yes, they did. Could they ever buy the whole government? No, not even close. And so I think because, I often talk about, for example, one of my favorite drives is when I'm coming up 78 towards New York City, and you're on that strip of Jersey City where you're first moving from Bayonne to Jersey City, and you just see that fucking skyline. There's nothing like it. I love it. And I look at that, and whenever I'm looking at the skyline from anywhere, the thought pops into my head every time where I go, I can't fucking believe that not one of those buildings went up with some dude in a silk suit with an Italian last name, getting a manila envelope and saying that one will do. Like, that is wild to me. And so I think because they were so, like, people in high society took such offense to the fact that these guys had such, they did evil things in society, but then they also injected their extortion and stuff into things that then built important things or were a part of the foundation of, like, America's rise in the 20th century.
In World War II to
assist exactly. Exactly. I mean, they were dropping flyers into Sicily, allegedly warning them to, Don Callo that the boys were coming through and everything was going to be all right. I mean, when the elites definitely don't, and I don't blame them, they don't like that that's a part of the history. And they especially didn't like it when these guys did brazenly whatever the hell they wanted. So we put all, like, it wasn't the Island of Misfit Toys in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s working OC. They put all the superstars on that. They put all the hardos on that, and they took these guys down, or they took them way down a peg. And so I think because in this country we've put so much focus on it, and because they got to a point where they were so brazen and intertwined, and were as much power as they had, they couldn't buy off the whole government.
Correct.
They were more of a rat in the science lab, whereas in other places they're the rats in the streets.
Good point.
And good luck catching them.
That's a good point. All right, one more question, then then I usually have a final question. So no. Okay, a little tinfoil hat here on this one, but I kind of feel also the Italian American mafia, and I think Jim, I don't know if he told me this offline or online, because he never would have allowed this because it would have been pushing it too far. but I always felt they should have maybe had a paramilitary wing. And hear me out before you. I know you think like, at times a little weird, but now it's getting weirder. Hear me out for a second. Not to fight the military or to fight in wars. A new Murder Inc. that if like Julian and Tom flip, like not fat Nunzio shows up with a shotgun, but trained assassins just like wipe us and 3 generations out. So you know what? The next guy's not going to rat. Or if somebody does have to go, it's done efficiently and done in like a rendition type way with trained people. And, they may not even be Italian. They may just be, they report to the commission. They kind of a paramilitary wing, 15 to 20 guys that are activated at some point. They're on a salary, former gyms, former Andes. Maybe they had a gambling problem. Maybe they're a little morally casual, whatever. But I don't know. I kind of think the mob messed up by not having that. Am I a little tinfoil hat on this one, or would you maybe?
No, you're not, because there's been extreme organizations that do behave like that around the world. And this is actually a really interesting one, because I think the reason the mob never got into that is because they had this weird moral code. They still do, where they're like, the men in this life, you're in this life, and hey, you do anything, it's that, right? But women and children, separate thing. People who aren't in this life and are not attached to you, separate thing. Obviously, there's been some exceptions over the years, and you hear about those, and it draws attention, and the government gets on it when shit like that happens. But they don't. It's interesting in that these guys are the guys who will show up to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
They will have dinner with the whole family. They believe that their core values, even if they're wrong, they would like to believe their core values are like love, family, and that they're peacemakers and shit like that.
Correct.
The other extreme organizations don't think like that. Yeah. They're animals. They will kill every generation. I mean, what is it that, like, they some of the jihadists will promise 72 virgins or something when you go to heaven, so the 9-year-old can blow themselves up. They don't care. The Italians live for this earth. The other people either don't live for this earth or are subhuman or both. Yeah, and so I actually think it's the weakness. I say this, it's actually supposed to be a small compliment. It's the weakness of their humanity that would stop them from ever having formed something like that.
That was a fucking excellent answer. All right, final question, and hopefully you'll grace us with another follow-up. And then we'll have you plug your show. Not that you need it because you're killing it.
I need all the help I can get, man.
There we go. You could have dinner with any mobster, dead and alive. Who is it and why?
Oh, it's such a good question. There's candidates who would be up there for like, you have to say a guy like Joe Bonanno would be up there. He's so interesting. And like sitting across from Tory was sketchy because he looks just like him. It's kind of weird. But because like the guy, he was born in like 1900. It's wild, So he would be up there. Carla Gambino would be up there. Frank Costello would be up there. But the guy would have to be is Lucky. Because
that was my initial answer. Lucky or Totorino.
Well, I was thinking U.S. Not necessarily
U.S. Lucky's in that conversation.
So, I would pick someone from here. Yeah. It would have to be him because he and Joe invented the commission. He's the one who took the power to put them in a position where they did that. Correct. He was the first American gangster. He was proudly and happily Americanized. Correct. He worked across different cultures.
Yeah.
And, he was the bad guy, but like it or not, he was like, I talk about that skyline. He was the first with that, it just, that would be a very interesting dinner.
Absolutely. Did you guys get into, and there's so much more, I'm like, I go down certain rabbit holes, as I know you do probably as well. I'm kind of getting into, that's why I love to connect with him, kind of Bonanno post-New York Phoenix guy, right?
Yeah.
He went up to Seattle and there was kind of like a loose-knit Italian-run organization there that I don't think was Cosa Nostra, and I think he wanted to kind of put him in the fold, and they basically told him to go scratch, and he didn't have much of a choice because it was Seattle. He got into involved with a lot of car dealerships, but they also blew up his house. He blew the doors off. Now, some people believe that was a government did that, and there were some strong arguments for it. Other people believe it was just New York reminding him to stay in his lane. Did you kind of cover that at all? Or any of your research cover that
Actually,
at all?
that was one thing we didn't talk about, getting the door blown off the house. We covered a lot. Like, it was we moved fast and hard and got through a lot of real estate. I don't think we talked about that, but
that's not talked about much.
well, we did. Look, he and I believe him on this. His grandfather took a lot of offense to being called out for that book, because when he wrote that book, Rico didn't exist.
Good point.
And anyone he talked about was dead.
Yeah.
Now, were there a few things in there where he mentioned details that they probably don't appreciate someone mentioning? Sure.
Yeah.
But he wrote, he had every motivation to be a guy who would like rat on those people or whatever, just to like make his life go easier for the rest of his life, because they basically like kicked him out of his own shit.
Yep.
And he didn't. So what people also don't realize, and like they get real pissed off, like the family does, like the people who aren't involved in the mob get pissed off just from a pride perspective when they hear what's his name, Francis. Talk about, well, but no, fuck this. Like, who the fuck are you? Like, your dad never gave anything up or whatever, but like, I'm not blaming you, do you? But like, don't be out here talking about rats when you're one like that. Like, come on. Like, don't be calling people out like that.
Well, let me ask you, and I think I interviewed most. I mean, other than Leonetti, I covered a lot of the guys. Who would you want to come to the bunker? Who's one or two guys that you have on your radar?
I know John Alight would be a good podcast for sure.
Yeah, that would be
Leonetti can't do it on camera, right?
He did PBD, but he did it.
Yeah, but it's blacked out.
It's blacked. I don't know. He would not show his face.
When I'm bigger, I could do something like that. Right now, it wouldn't be a good.
You want real. You want to show.
I don't even know if I could.
Weird wig that would throw you off too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't care about that part, but he'd be interesting down the line. Put me on the spot with this. I like Danny's podcast with Mazza a lot. He was cool.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, look, if someone was not someone who's just like, oh, I met some guys a few times, that you have people like that, right?
Sure.
But if it's someone who was related to someone serious like Tori, I think that's fucking awesome. If there's someone who was really doing shit, then I think it's great. I think we'd have a great conversation.
Well, I'm trying to think, because I think with Sammy was good. Took a different angle, and we didn't get into too much. I look at the business angle of organized crime. We did kind of cover it a little bit on philosophy today here, but with him,
we are live, by the way. I want to say that to the chat.
Yeah, we
Sorry.
are live, exactly. So, and Sammy, I took a business angle. Some people liked it, some people didn't. I'll send you that one. Get your opinion. I thought that was okay. Again, when I interviewed Pablo's wife, I wanted to learn who he was. Was he a pensive guy? Was he up at night? Did he sleep well? Like, I don't know how a guy who just murders 3,000 people sleeps well. You know what I mean? Like,
fair question.
I run over like a rat, and I'll like not sleep for 6 months. But so like I'm very keen into the peripheral people as well, of important people like Bonanno's grandson is interesting to me. People like that. And in terms of the guys that are out there, and I know your style, Johnny A-Light would be a great interview with you. I know him personally, so if you ever need a setup there, I got your back. And and you just have a great podcast. Why don't you plug it, and then we'll wrap it up.
Awesome. Yeah, my podcast is called Trendifier with Julian Dorey. We'll be changing the name early next year, but that's what I wrote up with. It's a long story. And you can find me on YouTube at Trendifier, and my handle is at Julian Dorey. So you can write that, but Trendifier is TREND Fifier. And you can find me on Spotify, Apple, and then we're also on Google and Amazon and wherever you get your podcasts.
When's the Banana piece going live?
Saturday morning.
Sweet. Well, keep an eye out for that. We'll share it on the community. Julian, thank you so much for being on the Armchair NBA, brother.
Tom, thank you. I appreciate it, brother.
Sure.